He's also highly critical of the prosecution's star witness, Dr. Evans, arguing he asked to be involved in this case, meaning he wasn't an independent or neutral witness, and that affects his credibility.
Now, one of the prosecution expert witnesses who we've talked a lot about, Liz, is Dr. Dewi Evans. And in court, we heard some interesting evidence about him, which led to a pretty tense exchange.
Yes, the jury was told about some criticism of Dr. Evans, which had recently come to light. Mr. Myers explained to the jury that last year Dr. Evans was criticised by a judge in the Court of Appeal, and that was in connection with a report he'd produced for a different case. Mr. Myers said Mr. Justice Jackson had described Dr. Evans' report as worthless, saying he'd expressed biased opinions which were outside his professional competence.
Now, Dr. Evans refuted the criticism and defended his reputation. He said he stood by the report, stressing that it was the only time in his 35 years as an expert witness that he'd been criticised in such a way.
That's right. He claimed he'd not seen the criticism until it was brought to his attention last month, and he insisted that if he'd known about it, he would have told those involved with the Lucy Letby case.
He also insisted that all the evidence he'd given to the trial of Lucy Letby had been accurate. He accused Mr. Myers of attempting to create a diversion, being insulting and cherry-picking of the worst kind.
Lucy Letby denies harming any babies in this case, and her defence barrister Ben Myers-Casey questioned Dr. Evans about his view that fluid being injected into baby Q was to blame for his collapse. He also said baby Q had not crashed, as Dr. Evans had alleged in his evidence to the jury.
We've become quite used to Dr. Evans and Mr. Myers clashing in court, and this was no exception. Mr. Myers accused the doctor of changing his evidence because initially when he reviewed the case, he hadn't mentioned fluid being injected into baby Q. Their exchange has been voiced by actors and begins with Mr. Myers.
Your view is that the incident of the morning of the 25th of June is due to fluid and air being forced down the nasogastric tube.
A fluid or fluid and air? It's definitely fluid because he vomited fluid, maybe air as well.
You have recognised that the air aspirate from the NGT could have got there from the neopuffing, yes? As for the fluid, I am going to suggest that is something you have added at a late stage.
I think in all these cases I have said in the evidence on a number of occasions that I had to rely on notes that I have been presented with, and the more accurate the information we get, the more accurate your opinion is.
Mr. Myers pointed out that Dr. Evans' first report in November 2017 stated the deterioration in the morning of the 25th of June was due to inappropriate care because he was given a lot of air via his nasogastric tube and down to his stomach.
He went on to say that Dr. Evans' second and third reports in June 2018 and January 2019 repeated the same opinion. He went on,
What you are focusing on at that point exclusively is air. Now, you have reached this point where you have added fluid now to keep the mechanism going, keep the allegation going, rather than reflect the facts.
No. You've got it wrong again. We are here now, and we have heard the evidence from the people who were looking after him. I have never heard this before last Friday. So going on about what I wrote in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 is rather missing the point.
I am going to suggest that blood-stained bile on the 23rd of June is consistent with a gastrointestinal problem.
It simply does not explain the vomiting of clear fluid and the crash at 9:10 or thereabouts.
Whatever it is, there is not a crash at 09:10.
It is a crash. He needed resuscitation. He needed a neopuff. His oxygen saturations were 68. That's life-threatening. That's a big concern in a little baby. An experienced registrar had been called quickly. That's a crash.
That's a gross exaggeration, isn't it?
It is not. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to babies deteriorating.
One by one, these senior consultants have lined up in their evidence to do their bit to do down Miss Letby. Some blatantly, some understated, but all designed, in fact, to assist this prosecution. This case is a prime opportunity to hide poor performance and bad outcomes. The evidence is clear. The unit was unusually busy in 2015 and 2016, and busy with babies that had complex needs. At the same time, there was no change in staffing levels to accommodate this. The blame for absolutely everything has been heaped on her.
Mr. Myers also claimed the scientific research on air embolus, or air in the blood, was so poor it could not be safely used to support the prosecution case.
He said both the prosecution experts, Dr. Dewi Evans and Dr. Sandy Bowen, had relied on a single paper written more than 30 years ago by scientists in Canada as the basis of their knowledge. This paper showed 1 in 5 of 53 children affected by air embolism had developed a migrating discoloration on their skin, which was typically pale, with flitting bright pink patches.
As a basis for conviction for someone of murder and attempted murder, it is tenuous in the extreme. That meagre piece of research has carried into guesswork in this case. Scientific evidence needs to be sufficiently reliable if you're going to rely on it. What guidance you have had from the experts has been applied inconsistently throughout the case. The evidence is so poor it cannot be safely used to support these allegations.
And he claimed all 3 of the prosecution's experts, Dr. Dewi Evans, Dr. Sandy Bowen, and to a lesser extent Dr. Andreas Marnarides, were not independent.
He reminded the jury that Dr. Evans' credentials had been strongly criticised by a judge in a separate case in the Court of Appeal, and he suggested it was incredible that the prosecution had based their case on his theories.
All 3 prosecution witnesses were partisan, he said, and they decided to support a theory of guilt rather than deal with the facts.